You know, people like to use the phrase, "this is why we can't have nice things," anytime something goes wrong and society does something that proves the collective whole as unworthy of whatever is constituted by the word nice. And honestly, I've always been kind of annoyed by the phrase, because it's putting the cart before the horse. Forget about nice things. We can't even have the boring things anymore. Yes, it would appear that sedans are going away. Gasoline-powered sedans, anyway. I mean, it's an important distinction to make, because we're talking about those perennial daily drivers that it's hard not to think about when you use the term daily driver, because that's what they've always been, for the most part. But drivers of gas-powered vehicles are facing a reckoning as options dwindle. And for the record, I'm generally pro-EV, you know? I've liked the overwhelming majority of the electric vehicles I've driven. The hybrids too, for that matter. But I'm also realistic about where we are in terms of the EV revolution, that for all the advancements made so far, it's still reality that for a lot of regions in the United States, the infrastructure still isn't there yet to support EVs at a broader level. And so the debate continues as to whether or not affordable dailies are an endangered species, with some arguing for a resurgent used car market in recent years, and others stating that the market will dry up once traditional gas-powered dailies like sedans are no longer manufactured new. Data suggests it's likelier that these traditional gasoline-powered sedans are looking at a harsh and fast-approaching sunset. And if that's the case, then we have a mystery on our hands. Hang on, let me get on my Robert Stack jacket. Yeah. Tonight, who is behind the demise of the sedan? Is it consumers? The automakers? Big Brother themselves? For every mystery, someone, somewhere knows the truth. Perhaps that person is watching. Perhaps. Yeah, it's me. I fully intend to solve this before the episode ends. It's the Roman Report. Let's go.
Roman Report at the end of the month, and I make what I want when I feel like discussing cars.
So word on the street is that the Nissan Altima will be discontinued within the next 2 years. For most, this is objectively good news, especially since there are clearly better sedan options still on the road, from your Camrys to your Civics and your Legacies and even Sonatas, just to name a few. But every sedan that goes away suggests a decline in the viability of the sedan category itself, because the simple truth is that if consumers were buying them consistently, then this wouldn't happen. In that sense, the disappearance of sedans over the years is the fault of consumers, as evidenced by the death of the Altima, which is arguably, more than any other sedan, intended to be the most accessible to everyday drivers, for some unsavory reasons we'll get to in a bit. Now, it seems like news of the Altima's demise has mostly been passed down to automotive journalists from inside sources who would presumably be in the know, along with some deductions based on the direction Nissan is taking with regards to electric vehicles. So nothing official as of yet, but a recent report by Automotive News goes into detail on Nissan's strategy, which follows the discontinuation of the Maxima last year. Quote, "In the next couple of years, Nissan could ditch 2 of its 3 remaining sedan models, leaving only the compact Sentra in the lineup before the automaker debuts a battery-powered sedan by early next decade." End quote. The article goes on to reveal another new wrinkle to Nissan's abandonment of what largely keeps them relevant to everyday drivers. Quote, "Nissan will drop the subcompact Versa after the 2025 model year," people familiar with the plans told Automotive News. According to Auto Forecast Solutions, production is set to end in April 2025, with no next generation planned. The midsize Altima will sunset following the 2026 model year, after production was extended a year at Nissan's underutilized Canton, Mississippi factory. End quote. Now, the survival of the Sentra sort of makes sense. I would imagine it's big with rental fleets, considering that findings by the Autopian suggest that the Sentra makes up more than 1/3 of all Nissan sales, some 36%, And I just find it so hard to believe that there are that many people buying Sentras otherwise. But what do I know? I mean, I almost wouldn't be surprised if Nissan just kept the Sentra and the Rogue at this point, if only to run a lean company that churns out low-cost, high-return products. But then that's kind of what the Altima is, right? So why is it reportedly going away? Well, other than the boilerplate explanation of the company ramping up its electric vehicle efforts, my theory is that it's a reaction to the trends of the automotive marketplace. I'm not sure if sedans selling badly is the result of fewer sedans being made, or if fewer sedans being made is the result of people simply not buying them. But sedans don't sell like they used to, at least not new ones. On the used market, everything sells, because even if you're getting gouged by a guy selling his '07 Camry for $12,000, at 135,000 miles, it's probably still a better deal than getting okey-doked by dealer markups on a 2024 model. And just like with manual transmission-equipped vehicles, companies at large are only going to produce what the market will sustain. And it looks like sedans are no longer as appealing to the average driver in an age of SUVs, crossovers, EVs, and even a sedan-adjacent option like a smaller hatchback or a subcompact. If the Nissan Altima were selling like the Sentra, it wouldn't be going anywhere. But sedans are struggling, and it seems to be affecting automakers across the board. Ford CEO Jim Farley went on the Smoking Tire last month, and it was an interesting episode because he revealed that whatever you think of how bad sedan sales were for the company, they were actually worse. When asked why Ford got out of the sedan game altogether, Farley stated, quote, "The reason is very simple. We lost billions on them, and we are not in a position to lose billions on vehicles anymore. As a business leader, I don't believe that the company should allocate capital to vehicles that I know we're going to lose money on. And so we decided to create Mavericks, Broncos, Bronco Sports, and all sorts of other vehicles like the GTD that will make money. Raptors, Tremors, transit vans, electric vehicles that will make money over time. That is what we do at Ford. It was a judgment call to move out of the commodity part of the market into vehicles that our company wakes up in the morning and does well." End quote. And so that's it. Sedans are dying because the consumers aren't buying. It's all their fault, right? Well, not exactly. Okay, so here's the thing. You can blame consumers for not purchasing a product, resulting in that product becoming a less viable option over time. But there's an argument to be made for how quality, or the lack thereof, factors into things. After all, if sedans are going to survive long term, then the examples that remain need to be good, right? Yeah, Big Altima Energy is a meme. Yes, okay, great, perfect. But it's predicated on real conditions. When you look at the Altima CVTs and their inconsistent reliability and the generally poor performance of the vehicle itself, the affordability argument, insofar as you actually believe it, is really all the car has going for it. And all this for a car that used to be somewhat celebrated in its earlier years. But then those L31 Altimas didn't have CVTs, now did they? I mean, how affordable is an Altima when you're dealing with a car that eats transmissions like a busted ham radio, or whose oil goes through its system like Taco Bell through a sensitive stomach? Or a car who's faced an entire recall in 2023 over engine failures due to seizures resulting in loss of power, metal shavings in the oil pan, and downright engine failure. And the latter group of owners were arguably the lucky ones because not every issue the Altima faces is covered by a recall or by warranty, especially if you own one long enough. The money you're supposedly saving in the initial phase is just going back into maintenance to keep it on the road. And that's if it's even being maintained at all. It's not all that uncommon to see Altimas with fading paint, rust spots, trash bags taped over busted out windows, zip-tied bumpers, or people who are so laissez-faire about spatial awareness that they're driving headlong into potholes because they're driving with one eye closed to trick themselves that the check engine light isn't on, turning the yellow center lines into their own private third lane. But are Altima drivers really that much worse than someone driving I don't know, an old Ford Taurus. And even if they are, you could argue that the Altima is such a uniquely bad car that it doesn't really inspire anybody to take care of it anyway. Which brings me back to the automakers themselves. Sedans arguably wouldn't even be in this situation if we had better ones, but the Altima is a microcosm of the decline of sedans with your Dodge Darts and your Mitsubishi Mirages and most things Chrysler. And what's wild is that the heat isn't even put back onto the automaker for these cars, but rather onto the people who buy them. And while you could easily draw the correlation between bad owners and poor credit scores, the classism of it all ignores the culpability of the manufacturer themselves, because the reality is actually quite sinister. Nissan in particular has been credibly accused for preying on buyers with their auto loans, and how they essentially take advantage of people without the leverage or know-how to tell them to kick rocks. And this goes back years. A 2021 report by Cars Direct found that Nissan was straight up financially incentivizing dealers to get people to sign on for more expensive, longer-term loans. As the report states, quote, "The brand has opted to pay dealers a fee equal to 1% of the amount financed when buyers take advantage of promotional financing. By the company's own estimates, this could more than double a dealer's compensation when a buyer opts to finance. On a $32,285 car loan, Nissan says the offer can amount to a manufacturer-to-dealer payment of $323 compared to the previous $150 flat fee. While there's a lot of fine print, we did notice that Nissan is promising dealers as much as a $450 fee when consumers choose to take out an 84-month loan at non-promotional rates." End quote. And it gets considerably worse as your credit score goes down. As the article continues, quote, "For example, Nissan's online payment calculator lists a 72-month rate of 14.9% for the Nissan Sentra if you have a FICO score under 620. On a $20,000 car, we estimate this could entail over $10,300 in interest and end up costing $30,370 before taxes and fees. Nissan recently doubled down on subprime financing and reportedly took steps to make its dealers happier by eliminating so-called stair-step incentives, criticized for driving down prices. While more compensation could be a good thing for dealers, that may not prove to be the case for consumers looking to get a deal." End quote. So the implication here is pretty clear. Dealers are not only encouraged to push those loans onto customers, they're disincentivized from actually stocking affordable vehicles to begin with. If your bonus is higher the more expensive the car is, you're just not going to bother even carrying cheaper models, because it won't make sense for your bottom line, same as if you were a waiter making a percentage commission on every special that you sell. You're obviously going to try and push the seafood tower on patrons instead of the grilled cheese with the mayonnaise reduction that the owner only put on the menu so his son would shut up about letting him be a real chef. It's all pretty gross if you ask me, and not the grilled cheese, or at least not just the hypothetical grilled cheese, because this has resulted in the Altima developing a reputation as a car that only people of a certain income level drive, which ties back to the classism, because now people are drawing a correlation between the people who drive these cars and the consistently lousy condition of the cars themselves. But it can also be the case that even a well-maintained Altima is kind of a dog. Plenty of cars have bad reputations related to the people who drive them, from BMWs to Volkswagens to Corvettes. Trust me, I know, I probably don't have to explain it to you. But in a lot of those cases, the cars themselves are sound enough to overcome the negative association with their drivers. Whether it's mechanical or operational integrity, whether it's something else cool about them, whether it's the funding and competency of a better company behind them. These cars have something that precludes them going down with the ship, so to speak, of their driver's bad reputation. And let's talk about the brain trust of it all, because I feel like you can't really be surprised that people aren't buying sedans when your company is not really advertising them the way that they advertise other cars in their lineup. From the Fusion to the Malibu to the Charger, the sedan graveyard is littered with the bodies of cars that I think a lot of us thought would be around, if not forever, then longer than they have been. But these are cars that couldn't justify their continued existence in the eyes of profit-driven automakers, who struggled to even find the money to justify advertising the sedans they already had. A May article by David Zipper for Fast Company explains the role of automakers in shaping public tastes. Quote, "Car makers, for their part, powerfully influence consumer demand through billions of dollars spent on advertising. Because SUVs and pickups are more expensive and profitable than sedans, manufacturers have a clear incentive to tilt buying decisions away from small cars and toward larger ones, which helps explain ad campaigns designed to confer an undeserved green halo on SUVs." End quote. In a lot of ways, the automakers themselves are the culprits in the death of the sedan. Yet, like the fable of the frog and the scorpion, you almost have to expect companies to act according to their nature. And the same is true of our next suspect. Alright, so not to descend into conspiracy or anything, but you can make a case for the government being responsible for the gasoline-powered sedan exiting stage left. And no, I don't mean because of the federal tax credit for EVs. This goes back further than that. Forget the electrified future for a minute and think back to when sedans truly started to disappear, and what largely took their place. It wasn't EVs, it was SUVs, it was crossovers, it was trucks, because this is a land where everything grows bigger over time. We're just throwing Mario mushrooms and gas station dick pills at everything like a science experiment we didn't start until the night before it was due. In fact, the automotive marketplace, at least in the United States, has been actively hostile towards sedans for years. And one of the biggest reasons why is illustrated in the aforementioned David Zipper article, which details the federal government's role in the embiggening, it's a perfectly cromulent word, stop, the embiggening of the car market. Quote, "Federal policy has, in many ways, distorted the car market to favor larger vehicles. Fuel economy regulations, for instance, are more lenient for SUVs and pickups than they are for smaller cars, nudging automakers to produce more of the former and fewer of the latter. Another egregious example, small business owners such as real estate agents can save thousands of dollars by writing off the cost of their vehicle, but only if it weighs more than 6,000 pounds. A stipulation that effectively excludes sedans entirely." End quote. And it goes back to changes made by the EPA around 2012, which essentially created the conditions that incentivized larger vehicle production in the first place. A New Republic article from March explains that the Environmental Protection Agency effectively made an amendment to corporate average fuel economy, or CAFE standards, that would decide fuel economy requirements based on a formula of wheelbase multiplied by width, which meant larger cars had fewer hoops to jump through to get to the public than your typical passenger cars. Quote, "In less than a decade after the change took effect, between 2012 and 2021, the EPA found that the percentage of new vehicle sales classified as passenger cars and those classified as light trucks has essentially flipped. In 2012, 64% of new vehicle sales were classified as passenger vehicles, while 34% were classified as light trucks. By 2021, light trucks accounted for 63% of sales, while passenger vehicles accounted for 37% of sales." End quote. So while we can blame automakers for making fewer sedans, who are the ones creating the conditions that favor making fewer? I don't know that we can lay it all on consumers not buying them, you know? Hell, if you want to get really granular, you can go back 16 years. How has it been 16 years? You can go back 16 years to the federal government bailing the auto industry out and the subsequent disaster known as cash for clunkers, which took a lot of sedans off the road and then didn't replace them with anything better. And yeah, I know, the bailout was necessary to save the American economy, and you could say that the EPA classifications were intended to help the environment in some roundabout way I'm not smart enough to understand, you know? Emissions, carbon footprint, all that jazz. But it feels like the end result is that cars that were traditionally less expensive have started to cost more over time because they need to get better fuel economy, which means they become more expensive to make. And at that point, you might as well just make a larger car with less strict standards, or make a hybrid or an EV and shift away from having to adhere to all that anyway. And if you do then make sedans, you're going to charge more to recoup the cost for having made it at all. As an example, a study by analysts for CarEdge found that the price of a Hyundai Elantra increased by 22% in the last 5 years, following along with trends of other automakers who've seen 5-year price jumps, like Stellantis, whose price increased by an insane 50.61%. I'm about to call 411 to ask if I need to call 911 to order a paddy wagon to take Stellantis executives to the funny farm. Interestingly, it was Subaru and Nissan who increased the least, with 19.05 and 19.1% increases, respectively. But overall, it seems like the increases are outpacing what can be explained by external factors like the pandemic or inflation. So I guess we're left to wonder, did the federal government really kill the sedan? I guess it wouldn't be a good mystery without a surprise suspect at the end. The global chip shortage has wreaked havoc on inventory, so chips are understandably precious commodities, and you're not likely to want to waste one on a car that isn't selling. But I wouldn't necessarily consider the chip shortage the cause of death so much as a comorbidity. No, that's not the suspect I'm arguing for here. You see, the death of the sedan is predicated on the notion that the sedan is actually dead. And well... Alright, so the truth is that technically, there's no body here. No autopsy to perform just yet. In much the same way manual transmissions are tenuously alive today, sedans are still being produced even if they're being manufactured in smaller numbers. Even though it was nigh inconceivable that something like the Altima would ever vanish, the Altima isn't King Arthur. The health of the land is not tied to the health of the king, if you could even consider the Altima a king, or royalty at all, or even one of those lesser nobles like an earl or a duke, or a baron. I'm not really brushed up on my landed gentry. The discontinuation of the Altima doesn't necessarily herald the end for all sedans, even if I'm using it to anchor my argument. And besides, it wasn't ever really Nissan's responsibility to save the gas-powered sedan. We'd all likely be screwed if it were. You can still get an Elantra, a Camry, an Accord, a Corolla, a Sonata, a Jetta, a Mazda 3, an Audi A3, a Kia Forte, a Volvo S60, a Subaru Legacy, God help us, a Sentra. The sedan may not be thriving, hell, it may even be on oxygen, but the majority of the options left suggest that the selection has been culled down to a pretty decent group in some ways. At the very least, I think most of these represent a decent foot forward for the sedan's future, along with the rise in young drivers looking for affordable options to try and sell their parents on buying for them. Interestingly, a survey by Nissan found that 7 in 10 Gen Z drivers would consider a sedan as their next vehicle. Granted, considering isn't the same as buying, but it says a lot that sedans aren't being dismissed out of hand. And even if gasoline-powered sedans fall by the wayside, I would imagine the EV options would continue unabated since they would likely be among the more affordable of those electric cars, at least more so than a Cybertruck or a Rivian. So we're left to seek a conclusion. Who is the culprit? who killed the sedan? Or rather, who is killing it, making it less viable and running the risk of sending gasoline-powered options to an earlier grave than anticipated? Well, even if it's only my opinion, I promised an answer to the mystery, and so the culprit I choose is the automakers. Yes, they are incentivized by the federal government to offer larger cars. Yes, consumers are notoriously stingy about actually purchasing sedans when push comes to shove. And sure, sedans are still alive and technically not even gone yet, but for me, when considering the value of the evidence against each suspect, I found the culpability greatest among the automakers. I mean, you have the quality argument that the sedans have gotten worse over time, with less reliable transmissions, engines that are prone to recall, and distracting, garish, over-engineered designs with cabins that feel less inviting than a car from 1994, with cluttered dashes and IMAX touchscreens and seats that feel like somebody put one of those cheap back massager cushions over a Midwestern father's rocking chair. You know, the one he refuses to throw away because the fact of its continued structural integrity after 35 years means it's earned its spot in the living room even if it's slowly giving him scoliosis. I genuinely feel like sedans might be better accepted if they were just plain better. But if all things are equal, Americans are going to go for interior space, ground clearance, and overall versatility over something inconsistent and overpriced relative to what they feel it should cost. I feel that manufacturer-incentivized dealer practices can lead to lowered consumer confidence in the sedan itself, when that sedan ends up not being worth the price that they paid, which in turn leads to lower future sales and fewer sedans being produced. And that's why we can't have nice things. Of course, this is all entirely conjecture from one guy on the internet. So I really do want to hear from you. I want to read your comments while I eat lunch and then again later while I'm eating dinner. So entertain me with your insights down below. I'm not kidding. I literally do read them while I'm eating because I'm someone who, I don't want to watch TV while I'm eating. I want to, read. And I really do read them, and I really do find them engaging and thoughtful. So let me know who your suspects are and your conclusions. And if you enjoy the show, please consider supporting us on Patreon. The link is in the description. Anything helps. And if you liked this video, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, or sharing. Our content only exists thanks to your support. Seriously. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your week, everyone.